welcome once again to Sid Caudle Christian People's Alliance. And we've got, a varied day today, all sorts of unusual things, actually. We've got to congratulate the Lionesses, of course. Sid actually watched that, and there we are. So there's something else to pray for today, Sid.
That's an exaggeration. I watched some of it, is accurate. I actually probably watched about 15 minutes of it altogether out of whatever it was, over 2 hours.
Oh. Well, that's only 30 Hail Marys and 2 Our Fathers. You're doing well. We jest. We'll come back to you, ladies, in a little later in the programme. But we've got to start with, well, I don't know, the deal, I suppose you can call it, that Trump is doing all over the world. And yeah, GB's fared better than most. We're only on 10% tariff. The EU are on 15 with other goodies. And special relationship, call it what you like. Better for his golf courses up there in Scotland. But for whatever reason, Ms. van der Leyden is happy about it. And they've got away with it because it was going to be 25%, the pundits said.
Yes, but it's interesting, you see, because the previous tariffs were 5%. So the tariffs for the UK have gone up from 5% to 10%. And there's no need for those tariffs to go up because we were basically trading roughly on a parity with the United States. I mean, we weren't making a lot, but they weren't making a lot either from the trading relationship. So there's no need for tariffs to go up at all. So we've got a bad deal. The EU have got a very large trade surplus with the United States. So obviously there was every reason for Trump to impose tariffs on them. So they've got 15% tariffs. But interestingly enough, of course, if we were still in the EU, countries cannot negotiate trade deals at all. The EU has to negotiate all the trade deals for every country in the EU. So had we still been in the EU, we couldn't have negotiated a separate trade deal with the United States. We'd have had to have accepted the 15% that the EU has negotiated. So we're 5% better off. But the other thing which is very clear to me from these events is that we have a massive trade deficit with the EU. So what we should be doing is imposing severe tariffs on the EU in order to bring the EU trade up to an equilibrium with the UK.
Absolutely. But this is Starmeritis. He wants back in, doesn't he?
Yeah, but it's not just Starmer. I mean, it's right from the word go. We can go all the way back to Theresa May when we first decided to leave the EU. I mean, what Theresa May negotiated was an absolutely terrible deal that was disastrous for the UK. Unfortunately, that didn't go through Parliament, so that deal was never implemented. But what we should have done, which actually the previous governor of the Bank of England was saying, is leave without a deal. Because we've got such a big trade deficit with the EU, we don't need a deal. All we're doing in negotiating a deal is enshrining into the deal a massive advantage for the EU. And that's what we negotiated. What we then eventually negotiated with Boris Johnson was much better than what Theresa May negotiated, but it was still advantageous to the EU and, of course, greatly disadvantageous to Northern Ireland. If we'd have just left without a trade deal with the EU, then we wouldn't have had all the problems that we have with Northern Ireland trying to sit in between the EU and the UK and having to negotiate a separate deal. I mean, we could have just left without a deal, and then we could have imposed tariffs on the EU and we'd have been far better off. That's the reality of it.
Absolutely. And don't forget, we're a soft touch for everything, Sid. It's not just this, it's whether payments will be adequate enough for illegals or whether it's who gets permission to do whatever in our country. And I'll tell you something, there's a real elephant in the room that's going on and it seems to be ignored. Talking of soft touches, or is it greed? The number of companies in UK companies have been taken over by foreign companies, not just the US. Half of Europe buys British companies, and it's done obviously on the greed basis insofar as, said the managing director of one company, which means the ball, of course, "Oh, I can't refuse that offer for the share price. Yeah, I'm going to sell 30%, 60%, 90%, all of it." And it goes abroad. And therefore we lose a lot as a country. And look, there can be no better explanation than what the Glazers have done to Manchester United. That's encapsulated. Ruined a football club, taken control, however much people say. To the contrary, it's been an awful move, and it goes throughout British industry. And successive governments do nothing. This is vital to our existence, Sid.
I agree with you. And the Monopolies Commission used to be very powerful and used to step in and stop a lot of these things happening. You see, because if people don't understand what you're talking about, I mean, before the Glazers got involved with Manchester United, they were a very well-run club with no debt. They were making big profits every year, and the owners had advantage of the big profits which Manchester United was making. When the Glazers came in and bought the club, they actually used the club as collateral for the loans that they were taking out to buy it, which was incredible, really. So all of a sudden, a club with no debt became a club with 500 million, 500 million debt. It's just like, which was used in order to buy the club. So no wonder the fans are upset, because all of a sudden they've lost their club, and their club, which was which they're putting a lot of money into to buy season tickets and goodness knows what, is all of a sudden, now in massive debt and not owned by them at all. So they've lost control of it. So it's hardly surprising that the fans were literally saying, "Look, we're going to have to start our own club." And they started FC United of Manchester, and then they also around that time Salford FC started, which was started by Man United players. So they're basically saying, "Look, we've lost control of our club." Now, if you apply that to other areas of British industry, absolutely. You see, but what should happen is that the Monopolies Commission step in and basically say, "No, I'm sorry. This is anti-competitive. It's not in the interest of our industry. So because it's not in the interest of our industry, we're not allowing you to buy it. Full stop. End of story."
Moving on to another unusual subject is the Ukraine. Now, we all support the Ukraine, well, most of us do, against the Russian bear himself, Putin. Yet Ukraine has had a difficult past, let's say. They've always been masters of hacking, of course, have it for years around the world. This is coming back, of course, to the fact that it's probably paid off now with their superiority in what the drones are doing. They're very technically clever, the Ukrainians. And you've got a situation of oligarchs there, just the same as in Russia. And Zelensky has got to tame them, I suppose. Reach an agreement with them. There's 5 in particular. It is just like being in Moscow. And they're making a fortune out of procurement, just as many people have done worldwide, especially in the UK. Governments desperate, need breathing apparatus, etc. And procurement goes out there, civil servants in panic, paying 2 and 3 times as much as the corrupt providers. Not them all, some are good guys, but a lot of them are taking advantage. And that is going on hand over fist in the Ukraine. And they are making fortunes, the oligarchs and other rich people, and taking advantage, obviously, of the war.
Well, yes, unfortunately, when wars occur, this is something that happens. Some people make a lot of money out of it because there is a lot of money to be made. And of course, governments end up in enormous debt because all of a sudden they got to spend billions to purchase all this military equipment, which previously that they weren't spending. And it's like, because a war is going on, and it's a crisis, it's like they just have to put the cost of borrowing to one side, while they've just got to get at all costs the military equipment they need in order to survive. And that's what goes on in a war. But what we need is to bring this war to an end, and we need it to come to an end swiftly. I mean, it's quite interesting. Trump thought before he came into office that he'd be able to solve it very quickly. I mean, he did say, "Well, I think I can." He thought that he could do a deal with Putin, and thought he could bring both sides to the negotiating table and get an agreement. But he didn't really realise the extent to which Putin was actually committed to taking over Ukraine at all costs. And he's determined that he's going to remove Zelensky and he's going to occupy, the whole of Ukraine, basically. That's what he wants to occupy. I mean, he wants to remove Zelensky and have his puppet in place. That's what he wanted right from the start, and he's still determined to go down that line. And the more he loses the war, or the more, I should say, the more he loses millions of troops, which seems to be what's happening. I mean, they seem to have lost at least 1 million troops, and they seem to have lost enormous amount of military equipment and enormous amount of cost and money, and it's had a terrible effect on the economy. The more that happens, the more he's like, well, I've got to win at all costs to justify all this loss of lives and spending. So I can't give up now because we've got to win. So then he's now embarked on a massive mobilization of ordinary Russians that haven't volunteered and don't want to fight in order to desperately try and win the war. But the whole thing is a complete disaster. It's absolutely disastrous. And Trump is now saying going to go down the line of imposing more severe sanctions on Russia and more severe sanctions on any country that trades with Russia. He can see that the problem is Russia and not Ukraine. Initially, he was saying the problem is both. But no, sorry, the problem isn't Ukraine. Ukraine didn't start this war and they don't want to continue fighting it.
Yeah, move on. We'll come back to something akin to what we've been talking about shortly. But about a week or so ago, we had the OBR coming out with figures that startled everybody, and they're now being confirmed. Basically, they said £2,500, you're better off staying at home than going out to work. Now, it's a lot of money between working your socks off and getting £2,500 less than a couch potatoes did. And it's all the soft Britain touch again, isn't it? How can one solve the problem? Certainly Labour don't seem to want to do it, neither the ex-Conservative Party.
Well, the Conservatives tried to solve it by allowing people who got on modest incomes to continue to claim benefits, so that no one will be better off at home than at work. And that was what the Conservatives actually did. They brought in benefits to actually achieve that. You see, what's happening now is that the Labour Party is desperately trying to cut benefits and basically saying, oh, well, these people don't need any benefits, because they're already working, so we're going to take benefits off them. And all of a sudden, they're now finding that, oh dear, people are better off out of work than in work now. So what they're doing is they're making changes, but they don't know what they're doing, frankly. And that's what we need. What we need is people that are on benefits that get back into work. They're guaranteed by the government that they cannot be worse off going to work. That's what we need.
Okay, sounds simple, but it's obviously not. The other thing we've mentioned in the past, of course, is dear old HS2. And now some interesting facts are coming out. We all know the thing was heralded, saved 20 minutes between London and Manchester, and I've always shrugged my shoulders and said, well, yeah, really, what good will that really do with all this money being ploughed into it? Now it comes out that we are out there to compete against the Japanese bullet train and basically the rest of Europe on speed. It's all about speed. We must get something capable of 200 miles an hour. Really? If we settled for 20 miles an hour less, it's come out, then we wouldn't have had to put tunnels through underneath villages. We wouldn't have had to put deep cuttings, spoiling the landscape everywhere. and it's cost billions and billions to do that, whereby we're saving 20 miles an hour, adding another 5-6 minutes to the journey if you wish, for the sake of not making it straight and easier to build. Cut the curves out, easier to build. It's a no-brainer, Sid. Obviously, somebody's got no brains somewhere.
Well, yes, I think you're right. But I mean, as we've been saying for a very long time now, we think the priority should be a new London airport in the Thames Estuary. And that's what we should be building. And that's what we should be building links up to that. But of course, if you say, well, we should be putting all our money into London, then people say, oh, yeah, what about the regions? What about the regions? So we would complete HS2. But you've got to understand, you see, if we have a new London airport in the Thames Estuary, it would actually produce an enormous amount of wealth, because instead of having 3 runways in Heathrow, we'd have 6 runways in the Thames Estuary, and you'd also be able to fly at night. So you'd have massive increased capacity. It would also do wonders to the east of London, because everyone will be coming in from the east of London rather than coming in for the west of London. You still have Heathrow as with 1 runway as a local airport for people that wanted to go to the west of London, but the rest of what Heathrow currently occupies could be sold for housing. So you could have an awful lot of housing in that area, and you wouldn't be having to demolish villages, to build a new runway. So that will produce an enormous amount of wealth. As you say, HS2 is not producing an enormous amount of wealth. It's just speeding up the journeys slightly to Birmingham and Manchester and maybe Leeds if they do that branch. Okay, we're going to arrive 20 minutes quicker, but there's not going to be an enormous number of new hotels and new industry building up around HS2 because it's being built. And that's what's going to happen with the new London airport. With the new London airport, you'd have a massive amount of industry, hotels, commerce, goodness knows what, built up round the new airport. And it would, all these things brings in wealth. And you see, the problem is if we carry on as we are and don't do anything, then Paris and maybe Madrid, they have got the capacity, they're going to take over as hub airports, and Britain's going to lose out. So, we stand to lose an enormous amount of trade, as well as, not gaining the enormous amount of trade that we gain from having a new airport. So, that's why when you come to capital projects, you have to think about the cost benefit. It's not only the cost, it's also the benefit. And we're not getting enormous amounts of benefit from HS2. That's the reality of it, where we would from a new London airport in the Thames Estuary. We get enormous amount of benefit from it.
This and so many other projects, and it's very simple, Sid. The civil service are not up to the job of being a businessman. It is that simple. They don't look far enough ahead or from the business point of view. And that's why you get these terrible projects costing the country a fortune. So what is the answer? Can we get a new, dare I say, think tank, call it Quango? We've got enough of those, we know. But is there anybody with professional nous that can say to these civil servants, because that's where it all comes from, look, you can't do that because...
No, that's right. Well, it needs political direction. And, you can't just blame the Labour Party because it all started before the Labour Party. You can blame the Labour Party for going down the path of wanting a 3rd runway at Heathrow, because that's a project that they're saying that they're going to start. If that's a project they're going to start, that'll be a disaster. So we can blame them for that because the Conservatives haven't gone down that path. And of course, Boris Johnson was very much in favour of what we're saying, of having a new airport in the Thames Estuary. But you see, it takes political will. It's got to be a political decision. It's not just the civil service. The civil service may be having so-called experts or advising that this is the right way to go. But, politicians have got to say, no, I'm sorry, we're not going to go down that path, or else they've got to commission a report, which doesn't have to be by Quango, it can be internal to government. Somebody can do a report that looks at the cost benefit of having a a new airport in the Thames Estuary. You know, how much is it going to cost? What are the benefits going to be? And let's have a look at let's have a look at the report. And how long will it take us to build it? Now, you see, the thing is, as we've made clear, we're spending enormous amounts of money on Quangos that is wasted. And by the way, you see, people say, well, how are you going to save the money? So what we would do is just basically say, across the board, there's going to be no change to regulations for at least 5 years. So we're just going to leave all regulations across every industry exactly as they are for a minimum of 5 years with no changes. Now, if you do that, then basically you could get rid of thousands and thousands of jobs. So all existing Quangos would have to do will be to enforce existing regulations. And in some areas, even enforcement could be reduced, because you could say, well, we're not particularly bothered about, you know, enforcing these regulations, so we'll reduce the number of staff enforcing the regulations. But if you had a rule that there's going to be no changes in any regulation for at least 5 years, you could save billions, literally billions. That's the reality of it. Now, you see, it's interesting. You see, some people have said to me, "Oh, well, we should have some law that, you know, you know, every regulation had to be proved to be a benefit." I said, well, once you do that, you embark on a great big review of every regulation. And when you embark on a review of every regulation, the civil service get hold of it. And then they say, in order to do this review, it's going to cost, you know, probably 50 billion to do the review. So we are now embarking on the new government's request to review all regulations. Once you do that, you're playing into their hands. And you find you're actually now spending more on Quangos than you were before because of this review of regulations. Stop it. You know, stop this review of regulations. Just accept what we've got and run with it. Full stop.
There you go. Right, we've had some very good op-eds in the paper this last weekend indeed, and one from Miriam Cates. And what a good lass she is, and she talks sound sense. Ex-Tory MP, and she's come out with a statement. I'll give you the headline and I'll give you some facts, Sid, so you can chew on it. Britain won't change unless our very best are prepared to serve in Parliament. I think a lot of people would agree with that, but let's drill down a bit more. There's an unbelievable number of foreigners coming into the country. It's now 1 in 6. By both governments, Tory and Labour. 1 in 6 people are not born in the United Kingdom. Now, that's an awful amount. And if you want to get a bit deeper into it, from today onwards, apparently, 1/3 of babies born in the United Kingdom are from foreign parents. 1/3, 1 in 3. Golly. By 2063, ethnic white Britain is a minority country. And to put a cap on the whole thing, we're paying debt of 107 billion a year, way more than our defence budget may, and think what that could do with the NHS. Not a lot, I believe in my heart, wants rebuilding from scratch. But 107 billion going out before we start even funding anything. That is ridiculous. Nobody does anything because, according to Miriam Cates, you've got a situation where we've not got the best people in Parliament. Get people that'll do the job instead of lots of people straight from university with very little experience of life, never mind business, and other factors in there that chase ideologies like mad before thinking the real thing through.
Yeah, well, there's 2 things we're talking about there. One is the problem with debt, and the other is the quality of people in Parliament. If I can just deal with the problem with debt first, you see, really we can't worry about that figure. What we've got to worry about is the extent to which debt is increasing, which is the deficit, because you know we can't start repaying the amount of debt we've got until we stop it increasing dramatically. And the reality is, at the moment, our debt is actually going up by 148 billion per year. And that's an increase from 54 billion per year before the Labour Party came into office. So it's that figure we've got to get down and reduce. We've got to reduce the deficit. And how we reduce the deficit, as I've explained before, is by reducing revenue spending, which is reducing quangos and other things we do, remove the social requirements for government contracts and setting up a turnover tax and getting rid of woke requirements in other fields. And, in all these, we could save enormous amounts of money. And you see, that's what we've got to do in order to reduce the deficit. You see, and once we start reducing the deficit, there have been periods in the past under Margaret Thatcher and very briefly under Tony Blair when the country was repaying debt for a number of years. So, we're miles from that now. I mean, the previous Labour government just let it rip at the end. I mean, and the result of that was when they left office, they said, sorry, no money. I mean, because it actually gone up to 140 billion then in 2010, which in real terms now would be approximately 250 billion. So that's the increasing per year. We've got to get this figure down. We've urgently got to get that figure down. And once we've got that figure down and we start to repay debt, then we can say, look how much we're saving on the interest, and start to actually, bring that figure back into credit. But the other thing which will happen, of course, is when we start repaying debt, interest will also come down. So because interest comes down, then the cost of servicing the debt comes down. So we save hand over fist, always round. Now, the other question which you've asked me is about the quality of people in Parliament. And you see, the way the system works is that basically it's political parties that choose the candidates, and the candidates they choose, if they put them into safe seats or even winnable seats, are the people that get elected into Parliament. And because the Labour Party was so successful in the last election, we've now got a lot of people in Parliament as Labour who were selected as Labour candidates who never expected to get into Parliament in the first place. And frankly, some of them are coming out with most ridiculous stuff. They don't really know why they're there and they don't know what they're doing. And absolutely, these people are very low quality, I'm afraid. Also, I know from personal experience that parties actually select candidates more on the basis of the colour of their skin or what their attitude is to e.g. LGBT than it is to whether they will make good quality members of Parliament and work hard. And that's another major problem. But we're not going to solve the problem, unless we actually change the voting system. Because if we change the voting system, then, maybe there'll be a lot more parties that have a chance and everything will be a lot more competitive. And each party would have to make sure that their candidates were of very high quality to get into Parliament. But under the current voting system, I'm afraid this situation is just going to perpetuate and there's nothing much we can do about it.
Yeah, well, to change the topic very considerably at the moment, I'm going to ask you a question. We've mentioned in previous weeks about PREVENT, that's supposed to be stopping at an early stage treatment of anybody in the land. And these are the people that have been brainwashed, either in their own bedrooms or with other sinister input to commit horrendous crimes. It has worked a little bit, but nowhere near as much as it should have done. And the question is, Sid, generally when we have an atrocity in the United Kingdom, everybody's holding their and wringing their hands and saying this has got to stop. Now, to be fair, the Pakistani and Asian community, a lot of them are doing that. But at the head of these societies, the imams, for instance, don't seem to be the first to come forward in a lot of cases. In other cases, no, they do. But we seem to have got, and there's no inclusivity here, communities that have cut themselves off from the reality of the United Kingdom. And when this happens to the whole nation, and that's who's involved in all this, then we should have wringing of hands from everybody. But we don't seem to be getting it. Are the imams frightened of this?
Well, we've got to look at the reality of the Islamic religion. I mean, that's what's behind it. And if you look at the reality of the Islamic religion, you know, the Quran says, kill disbelievers. As for those who believe, cut off their heads. I mean, I've quoted there Surah 9:5 and Surah 47:4. You know, but there's numerous sword verses in the Quran, you know, which tell people to be violent. So violence is part of the Islamic religion. And by the way, in Surah 47, it's very clear that if you cut off the heads of disbelievers, then you'll have immediate entry into paradise. But you have to do it in the way of Allah, which is why you get these Islamic terrorists, when they do atrocities, shout Allah Akbar, because according to the Quran, they have to do it in the way of Allah in order to go to paradise. So that's what they believe they're doing. So what we need to do is to tell these people, or prove to these people, that actually Islam is a false religion. There is no paradise with virgin rivers of wine and lots of food, as the Quran describes. No one's ever been there, and no one will ever go there. And you see, there's lots of ways which we can prove this to them. So if Prevent worked properly, what they'd be doing is sitting these people in front of these videos and showing them the truth of the Islamic religion and the fact that, you know, that they're completely wasting their time, or in fact, even worse, I mean, they're actually basically making a place for themselves in hell by doing these terrible atrocities. See, once we prove that to them, then they'll give up doing it. But you see, unfortunately, the powers that be at the moment are more interested in pacifying the Islamic religion than they are with confronting it. We're in the terrible situation at the moment where Angela Rayner is trying to introduce an Islamophobia law, which is actually trying to make it illegal to criticise Islam. And we know what this means. We know exactly what this means. They've already got this Islamophobia law in Pakistan. And in this last week, we've had a Christian who's gone into a shop, you know, a Muslim shop, Muslim trader, and the Muslim trader has shortchanged them. They've charged them more than they're supposed to charge for the goods. And the Christian customer has complained, oh, wait a minute, you're not giving me enough change. You've shortchanged me. The outcome of it is that the Muslim trader has accused him of blasphemy, and the man is now arrested and imprisoned because he complained to the Muslim trader about being shortchanged. Now, that's literally happened in the last week. Now, that's going to happen in the UK if we have this Islamophobia law. You know, they're not interested in telling the truth. It's not all about, you know, a Christian criticising Islam and say, oh, we've got to have the right to criticise Islam. They'll make things up. They do make things up. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they make things up against me, because I've been a thorn in their side, and there's several Muslims that would love to kill me, and you know, and have even, you know, tried to do it, you know, and if there's an Islamophobia law, they can target me, and I can go to stand in front of a judge and say, no, I didn't say that, Your Honour, and I'll say, well, I'm sorry, but we've got several witnesses that say you did. And I'm afraid that you know, we found you guilty, and you know, your punishment is probably going to could well be years in prison. You know, for being accused of something that I didn't do. That's what happens in Pakistan. They put them on death row. They're not going to put people on death row in the UK, but you can probably have years in prison. You know, and that is the reality of what's going on now. We're not confronting the issue. We're making it worse.
What do you do, Sid, with those that have been here more than one generation, let's say, and have spawned children, and they're radicalised? And a lot of people said, doesn't matter, ship them back. Where would you ship them to?
Well, you see, I'm not particularly interested in that sort of thing, frankly. You see, what I'm interested in is confronting the religion and proving that Islam is a false religion, which we can already do, which we've done. You see, and this is one thing that's happening, by the way, is there's a lot of young Muslims that are leaving Islam because they actually recognise it's a false religion, basically saying what is substantially the same prayer 5 times a day is actually an utterable by the way, to a black stone in Mecca. That's what they're praying to. And if people don't know, the black stone in Mecca that all the Muslims pray to is actually a meteorite that came out of the sky long before Muhammad, which people started to worship. And then Muhammad took it up and started worshipping it. And that's why they pray towards Mecca. It's there in the Kaaba, and people that go to Mecca, circle around the Kaaba and kiss the black stone because, so basically Muslims are saying substantially the same prayer 5 times a day to a black stone. And young Muslims are saying, we're wasting our time, and they are wasting their time. They're utterly, utterly wasting their time. That's what we need to do. We need to confront that, not worry about, where people are coming from and why they're coming. Because you see, part of the Muslim religion is, we've got to have as many children as possible to create more little Muslims. And it's part of the Islamic religion to do that. That's why I came across a woman once who was on her 15th child. A Muslim woman, because she'd done so well for her community. She's got 15 children. Look how well she's done. And by the way, incidentally, this is why they're desperately trying to stop the 2-child benefit cap. Because if you've got 15 children, there's a 2-child benefit cap, you're losing enormous amounts of money. Think how much more money you would get if they remove the 2-child benefit cap. You're talking about thousands and thousands of pounds of additional resources.
You mentioned about proving that Christianity was right to a Muslim. How'd you do that?
Okay, well, what we've got is the first thing you can do is show that basically all the history of Islam as laid down in Islamic tradition is highly suspect. You see, there's no history in what's called the Seerah from within 200 years of the death of Muhammad. And the history that's laid down comes from Bukhari, who was Persian, so he was in modern day Iran, more than 2,000 miles from Mecca. And you see, we've got the Quran, but Muhammad is hardly mentioned in the Quran. See, the people mentioned in the Quran a lot more are Moses and Jesus, and mentioned much more in the Quran. See, what we do know is that the origins of Islam are basically a non-Trinitarian Christianity. And we can know this from coins. So the oldest coins have got crosses on them, and they come from Muawiyah. It's only from the time of Abdul Malik, who came along in 695 and built the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, that we actually find coins with the Bismillah on them. There's no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet. So that they didn't appear before 695. Before that, we had coins with crosses on them. So that's the origin of Islam. And you see, if you look at the Dome of the Rock, for instance, there's lots of Quranic inscriptions on the Dome of the Rock, but they're all different from today's Quran. And obviously the Al-Aqsa Mosque is mentioned in the Quran, and that wasn't built till about 700 AD. Muhammad died 632. So that's proof that there was no Quran at the time of Muhammad. So with all these things, we can prove our Quran today cannot have come from Muhammad, did not come from Muhammad, and at the time of Muhammad, there was no Islam. Islam only appeared from 695 onwards. Now, you see, if we prove these things, and we can also prove that Muhammad was never in Mecca. Mecca was not in any book till about 750, and Muhammad died 632, and it's not on any map until after 900. Mecca isn't a port. It's not by, there was no trading going on. I mean, as Patricia Conan wrote the book, Muhammad Trade, Islamic Trade and the Rise of Islam. So she proved that Mecca, cannot have been a center of trade, and was not a center of trade, and Muhammad was never there. And there's also other books that have looked at Quranic geography, and they've proved that all the ancient temples were all pointed towards Petra in Jordan. They weren't pointed towards Mecca until after 800. It was only after 800 that the Black Stone got to Mecca. Before then, originally, the Black Stone was in Petra. That's where Muhammad was. And Medina was almost certainly Median Saleh, which was the port city. So that's where all the trading was going on. And by the way, Muhammad had his night journey to Jerusalem. Now, he couldn't have a night journey from Mecca to Jerusalem. It was like 2,000 miles. It's impossible. He had a night journey from Petra to Jerusalem. That's the reality of it. But you see, when we prove that all the history of Islam is basically false. And at the same time, we can prove that all the history in the Bible is accurate. And we can prove that from the British Museum. We do a tour of the British Museum that shows 23 artifacts, which all prove that the Bible is an accurate history book from start to finish. Jesus is accurate, described accurately historically in the Bible, and we can prove that. He's not described accurately in the Quran. We can prove that as well. See, the Quran says, if people don't know, that Jesus wasn't crucified, Surah 4:157. And, you know, we've got not only we've got the Christian eyewitnesses, we've also got Josephus, the Jewish historian born 36 AD. We've got Tacitus, the Roman historian born 54 AD, that talk about Jesus' crucifixion. The Quran was written, as I say, sometime after 700 AD, saying Jesus wasn't crucified. It's false. You know, the Quran is false. Islam is a false religion. You know, and you know, I can go on and on and on, but you know, I think you get some idea of the flavour of, you know, it's easy to prove that Islam is a false religion.
Interesting stuff, Sid, and a lot of people would not go and say things like that because they will be frightened because of hate speech laws and others that would prevent you from saying that. And it's getting worse the way things are going in the United Kingdom, with lots of cases coming out now. People are not interested in stopping shoplifting. They're more interested in getting you and others about hate speech. Do you not fear your existence as a political energy is on the cusp sometimes?
Well, no, I don't, because you know we're not called to live in fear. But you know, one thing I should say is that though what I've just said to you, I have substantially said to the consultation on a new Islamophobia law, because I've actually told them, look, you know, we can prove that Islam is a false religion. This is the evidence. These is the things that we're saying. And if you're going to pass a law to prevent us from saying these things, you're basically saying that we cannot speak the truth. So, yeah, I'm not afraid to say these things. And even if they pass an Islamophobia law, I'll confront it. I'll absolutely confront it. You know, I don't mind going down to Speaker's Corner and confronting it and basically saying, okay, you've passed a law saying I can't criticize Islam. Okay, well, that basically means you're telling me I can't tell the truth then. You know, we've got to hide the truth. We've got to conceal the truth because Islam doesn't stand up to any criticism. That's basically what you're saying. And I'll say it publicly, and I'll say if they arrest me and I have to say it in court, I'll tell them in court. You know, we've got all the evidence to prove that Islam is a false religion, you know, so they have to pass a law to stop us speaking the truth. Is that what you want the situation to be in the United Kingdom? You know, we've now got to have a law to prevent criticism of Islam because we can prove that Islam is a false religion. Is that got to be the law in the United Kingdom? It can be the law in Pakistan. It can't be the law in the United Kingdom, I'm afraid, because we are a Christian country fundamentally. And the King of England has vowed that he will be a defender of the Christian faith, whether he is or not. That's what he's vowed. And that is the fundamental basis of our society. And I'm not going to allow us to give it up.
Right. Moving on. America is the world's leader. Why? Well, number one, military. Number two, the dollar. We're talking about fiscal matters in the dollar. In other words, the greenback is all powerful. Now, China, realizing this, is getting together with BRICS to change, and they don't care whether it takes 100 years to do this job, but they're determined to plant people in various places worldwide to make sure it happens. BRICS is an area, and I shall mention what it contains, and the viewer can make up their own mind. And it's Brazil, the first letter, it's Russia, the second letter, India, China, South Africa, and there are other hangers on now: Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, would you believe, the UAE, and Indonesia. They're all part of BRICS. So it's a big trading area, if you wish. And they want to use their own digital currency instead of the dollar. Now, digital currencies are somewhere up in the ether. People don't understand them. In essence, they are very simple in that when we have the dollar or the pound or whatever country, it has to have something solid to maintain its credibility and value. A lot of countries rely on their gold reserves. It can be anything from gold, oil, anything tangible that backs up their currency. And it's through the conventional banking system. Now, the unconventional banking system, if you wish, is the digital currency. Nothing backs it up. It's just a way of trading, darn sight cheaper from doing it from traditional methods when there's checks and balances and costs involved. But now, actually, a lot of the main banks and even Europe as a whole, and even the Bank of England is thinking about this. Let's have our own digital currencies. There is some backup. It will still not be backed up by gold, etc., but the backup will be through a governing authority to make sure it doesn't get out of hand. For whatever reason, whether this is the future or whether the bubble will burst, and it keeps bursting regularly. Let's be honest, if you're a clever investor, you've made a fortune out of Bitcoin that's not regulated in any way, or you've lost a fortune. So it's a real gambler's delight, this. And anybody sensible would tell you never put anywhere near 5% even of your investment portfolio in this type of gambling. But you might make a quick buck. So it's all about power, as these things are. Now, thinking about this and thinking about the long-term efforts of China, and this is sinister, Sid, but people are not aware of important things like this going on.
Yes, well, BRICS has been around for quite a long time, but it was originally a number of thriving economies that were rising up basically to challenge the traditional G7 economies, you know, United States, United Kingdom, Japan, Germany, you know, the very strong economies in the world. You see, but those economies have been very much in the doldrums. So it looks as though these other BRICS economies, which you've described, were rising up, expanding rapidly, and they were a more sensible investment for people investing money, because there's no point investing money in an economy that's in the doldrums. When an economy is expanding rapidly, that's a much better investment. That's why people started investing in those economies. But more recently, the situation has changed quite dramatically. I mean, Brazil has moved from having a very business-orientated president and government to having a basically socialist president and government. Russia has moved from being business-orientated, expanded economy to being a war-ravaged economy that's absolutely now in a complete mess and in recession. So the last thing you want to be doing is investing money in Russia. China's stagnated to a large extent as Trump has started to get to grips with tariffs on Chinese goods. And the rapid expansion of China, I mean, China was growing at more than 8% growth per year. You know, which if you think about our growth, we're struggling to get, to get to 1%. Suddenly Chinese are 8%. Obviously, you're going to make more money investing in an economy that's making 8% than 1%. But now suddenly China's beginning to see that 8% fall, down to more like 3 or 4%, and it could fall further with the tariffs that are being imposed on China. So from an investment point of view, suddenly these economies don't look as attractive as they looked 10 years ago. That's the reality of it. But politically, you're absolutely right. I mean, they've been set up as a rival to the dollar. And at one time, it looked as though they could successfully rival the dollar. Now it doesn't look as though it looks as though it's best for everyone to steer well clear of them, frankly.
Yeah. Well, before we go to the final footy subject, I've got to ask you another direct question. Trump seems to be, some say, running away, having a holiday in Scotland because he's fed up or frightened about what's coming out about Epstein. Now, having said that, the Dems, of course, are on to this big time, and lots of criticism has been made of him. And if it comes out bad, is he endangered about being impeached? Is it more smoke without the fire? I don't know, Sid. Tell us.
Well, the media are trying to make Epstein all about Trump because I've got a picture of Trump with Epstein. So we know Trump was with Epstein. The reality is that Trump was a neighbor of Epstein. They were living next door to each other. But Trump had enough of him. He'd actually banned him from Mar-a-Lago and said he was a creep. Now, the people that we know engaged with Epstein's girls are Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew, among others, and they said there's many other Democrats that actually engaged with Epstein's girls. We've got no evidence at all that Trump engaged with Epstein's girls, I'm afraid. So, they're trying to make it all about Trump. It's not all about Trump at all. But see, the fact they're trying to make it all about Trump is probably means that, they're trying to make it better for the Republicans just to hide it and not talk about it than to expose it, because because it could affect Trump. If they do expose him, bring it all out properly, then they'll realise it's not about Trump at all.
Okay. I was interested to watch an item the other morning on Breakfast Show where they got a typical left-winger on to give the left-wing point of view, but they got him from America, and it was about this subject indeed. And I was shocked. I mean, it's bad enough when you get a real lefty and a real righty for that matter. It's clearly ideological, and they really have a go. And it's tiresome, quite frankly, often. But with this guy, I don't think GB News in this case did their homework, frankly. They got this guy on that was a complete and utter ranter in the extreme, quoting figures that were wrong about immigration in Britain. And he was having a go like something on steroids. It was, as I repeat, an embarrassment for everybody. Interview had to be cut short. It was that bad. So when we get a real lefty in the United Kingdom, folks, you get a real lefty like the ultra Dems in America. It was vicious, Sid. What's up with them?
Well, I mean, they've got their agenda, haven't they? That's the reality of it. And unfortunately, their agenda is not the truth. But you see, behind GB News is Ofcom, which Dan Wootton called off communist. And, I've been told that Ofcom have been given a whole lot of additional powers to apparently to regulate social media. Apparently, they could actually close down X and can close down Rumble now. I mean, but unfortunately, GB News is scared of Ofcom. That's why they bring guests like this onto their programme, because Ofcom have told them that they've got to be balanced. And Ofcom love these people. The people that will lay into Trump and lay into the UK on immigration, Ofcom loves them. These are the people they want on the programmes. And by the way, Ofcom don't want any Christians on any broadcasting. They don't want Christians on social media either. They've absolutely got it in for us. And if any broadcaster dares to interview Christians, they're going to be in big trouble with Ofcom. It's disgusting, frankly, absolutely disgusting what they do and what they stand for.
But why are Ofcom like this, anti-Christian?
Because the people that are controlling Ofcom, the people that have got into power there, are probably all New Age. and New Age, as we can prove from Alice Bailey, who was 100 years ago writing all her books in 1924 and putting forward her 10 theses. Her printing press was the Luciferian printing press. She worshipped Satan. She didn't beat around the bush. And if you worship Satan, you hate Christians. And I'm afraid there'll be New Age people in control of Ofcom, almost certainly. I mean, I don't know who's in control. All I know is what they're coming out with. And what they're coming out with is anti-Christian.
Okay, we must move on to our serious subject now, footy. And of course, everybody's seen this last week, the vegan kit, which is absolutely extraordinary. Now, whether this was done for a joke, whether it was done to promote a political point of view, I don't know, but it looks truly awful. We should steer away from woke. We've had that in spades with the English football team. The men, of course. But let's move on to what happened yesterday evening. Well, there you are. The Lionesses did us proud. And I'm looking at some of the headlines. In fact, I'm going to read you what's it. And it says, Lionesses go where no England team has gone before. Now, we all know clickbait and we all know you've got to be a bit startling with the headline, but really, that's a bit OTT. Yeah, okay, the men have let us down in football terms anyway. The women haven't for various reasons. But is this where we are socially in our country? We've got to hang on to whatever we can. And when we get a victory, we've got to really wind it up to perhaps something it isn't. And a lot of commentators are actually saying how much of this is not only political, but also stating where you are in the grand world of social impact. In other words, women's rights. And it's another wag has stated, well, you can stop being so eulogistic about events of this nature. And well done, women, by the way, you did us proud. But it is what it is. And they are actually saying that women's football will come of age if you dare get somebody like Roy Keane commentating on it, because all you get is a very one-sided view, and it's promoting, if you like, the women's place in society. There's a lot going on here, Sid, that is social as well as footy.
Well, to be honest with you, I'm not really interested in it. I mean, I think well done the women, well done women's football. I mean, the fact is that women's football has come on in leaps and bounds in this country in the last few years. I mean, just maybe 5 years ago, they struggled to get 1,000 people at a women's football match. Now it's not unusual with the Women's Premier League to have 20,000 at a Premier League women's football match. And the British women's football teams have done very well. They've done very well in Europe, and good luck to them. I've got no problem with women's sport whatsoever. I mean, I love watching women's athletics. I enjoy watching any women's sport. So what's the only thing I'm opposed to is when they allow men to play in women's teams. But it looks as though that's effectively been stopped now. So as long as that doesn't happen, as long as it is purely women playing, I said good luck to them. I enjoy watching them, and I think the women did very well yesterday. And the goalkeeper was brilliant when it came to penalties. She was the person that made the difference really between the two teams, and made the difference between England winning and losing. And I've got no problem with women's football at all. Good luck to them.
I tell you what, you'd have a problem if it's been hinted there's going to be a special day, special bank holiday. This, by the way, is when the French are killing 2 of their bank holidays because they can't afford them. Their productivity in France is way ahead of Britain, by the way, and they're going bump faster than Britain for various reasons, even though their productivity is high. Our productivity in the UK is frankly rubbish compared with leading nations. But if they said, "Oh, we'll have a bank holiday," is that too much, do you think?
Well, I think what's wrong there is that when England won last time, 3 years ago, Starmer in opposition said, "Oh, the government should call a bank holiday. The government must call a bank holiday. This has been a tremendous success." And he promised, if they win again, I would call a bank holiday. And they've won again, and he said, "Oh no, sorry, I've changed my mind. There's going to be no bank holiday." That's the problem. You see, when a politician makes a promise and then changes their mind and goes back on it, I'm afraid it just removes all trust in politics. He should never have made the promise in the first place if he wasn't going to fulfill it. That's the reality of it.
There you go. We've got to finish with politics. He's turned the conversation round completely.
Well,
Sid, thank you so much. We'll see you very shortly.
okay, cheers.